Hello? Hello. Well, thanks for tuning in, VOD watchers, to my first stream in a very long time. And, yeah, I'm working on Zerve. Where's the camera? Here we are, yeah. I decided to go live on Twitch. It's been a little while since I've been on Twitch, but I'm here. I'm happy to be here. I want to work on my project and share the project that I've been working on. It's this app called Zerve. I'm super excited about it. And I've got a bunch of content kind of maybe prepared. Not actually prepared. I've made some stuff on YouTube, and I'm going to continue streaming and doing stuff. I'm actually starting to stream today because I'm in like this extreme coding funk, and I have been highly unproductive. And my hope is that by putting myself out there, I'm going to force myself to be a little bit more productive. But I'm also like not tweeting about this. This is going out to whoever's following on Twitch. I don't really expect anybody to be tuning in, but if you are, welcome. And yeah, I've been working on this app called Zerve, and I've made some slides about it, some content. And it's an open source app, so I'm building it in the open as I am possibly comfortable being here. Coming back onto Twitch, even though I haven't been coding live on Twitch for a very long time, maybe 6 years or something like that. But yeah, I want to present what I'm working on and work more in the public. I've also been working on my YouTube channel, which I should link and whatnot, but I'm sure you can find that. So yeah, if you're wondering at all what is Zerve, hang on, this song is a little too hype right now. I've got the hype tracks on to keep my energy going here, but I want to talk about what this project is. So this is kind of the chart that I've been using to keep track of like what I'm starting on. Oh hey, what's going on? Good to see you, Horatio. Yeah, man, I was working on that photo app for a while. Yeah, you're part of the OG crowd, but you're also part of the only crowd. Because yeah, there hasn't been much content that I've been making, but I'm working on this new thing that is also this old thing that I'm working on. I've realized I've revived this project so many times, I cannot like put it down, and I just will never give up on this project that I'm working on that I'm now starting to stream about. So welcome. Anyways, the vision for this app is to basically help everyone make apps, real apps, like full stack apps that have a back end, have the web front end, and also have mobile apps on React Native. So of course, there's going to be a little bit of a React Native contingent from my previous streams when I was working on this photo editor. But yeah, now I'm thinking about this thing called Zerve. And I'm trying to build something that is both super exciting to me, which is going to be like a software foundation for the long term that also is kind of like a no-code friendly thing. But I'm also trying to build something that's like a product that I can market. So like that's kind of my big challenge is how do I define my product in terms of really concrete terms that will make money. So that's what this little chart is for, is the vision of like what I think the app is going to be, but also like who am I selling it to in the near term. And now that at least there's someone who's showed up in chat, I don't know if anyone's actually watching. I don't have the view count up, which is probably a healthy thing anyways. But I will just quickly run through this slideshow that I've been working on instead of coding for the past week. And it goes into like what is Zerve for, and like the idea is with the mission being that we're going to make apps accessible for everyone. Zerve is initially for app creators, people who are already building apps, and I think so that's like an important framing because it's extremely expensive and complicated to make apps these days. So we can make the process a lot better, and here's how. Like the current process is you've got some like gremlin developer who's creating your application. Of course, we're not gremlins. We're friendly people, but it's it's a slow process to build and deploy the application because you need to deploy it on every platform and web, and you need to coordinate rollouts. It's all very painful, and the developers basically have to do that because it's very fragile. But you've got the business people too, and the business people are going to be informing the developers, like at your organization, like how the app needs to change. What features are being turned on and off, and all sorts of other inputs for the operational side of the business. And you've also got designers who are inputting to the engineering team, and that's the only way the designers can make changes in the app is through the engineering team. So this is a problem because not just because engineers are expensive, but because it takes the time away from engineers building useful features. So basically that's the current workflow. The developer makes the app. So let's improve the workflow. Because with a simple little integration, your app can connect to a Zerve server to get content updates and get new stuff. And what your developer does is your developer can go in and set the schema of what sort of content your application needs. Then your application can fetch that. And as developers, I know my audience is mostly developers here. It's going to be great because there's TypeScript support. So you can have type safety for your schema that we basically load in from the server so that your application knows exactly the kind of data that it's going to be getting from the server. So it's like a convenience thing. This is something that developers should love. And then now developers have a faster way to update the content in their application. And of course, that's cool. Developers, and you still have to do the deploy process every once in a while. But now that Zerve is hooked up to your app, your business people and your designers can come in and configure the app exactly how they want to configure it. And make all these changes that the developers had enabled for them just by setting up the schema and wiring it up. So now the business people and the designers don't have to waste the developers' time to make the changes in the application, whether or not it's turning features on and off, changing little settings here and there. Basically anything that you can kind of consider like a JSON configuration for your app that you don't want to have to deploy again. Now your designers and business people can directly access just by going into the Zerve app, and it's all type safe. So they're not going to do something that's going to break the application, which is, of course, what can happen if you do a more simplified approach to this. So yeah, that's the kind of vision for what I'm trying to build, in a sense. It helps, Zerve is the app that helps app creators own the content and configuration that's going into their app. Yeah, but also I think, this is what's funny, is I unironically think that Zerve is unlike any other open source thing in the world right now, which is really audacious and kind of silly to say. And I know that, but I do legitimately believe it. And yeah, so before I go on, I think I need to discuss a little bit about how Zerve works. And if you stick around for the coding stuff, it's going to be, we're going to get deep into it. But this is what I was hoping to code on today is the API server. And this is kind of what you think of. It's like the database, it's the backend, it exposes a HTTP JSON API. And then you've got the web front end, which is, in my case, it's a Next app, Next.js, web front end. And then you've got the React Native app, and that also connects to the same API. So they're all sharing the same data. So this is how Zerve works. But of course, each of these things are built out of reusable components, or packages more specifically. On the server side, there's a bunch of data handling components, but those data handling components are also useful inside of your web app. And also a lot of the stuff that you use inside of the web app, like some of your views that you can share using React Native, you're going to use that inside of your mobile app as well. So all of these things have mix and match of different components inside of them, but this is how I think of the Zerve application. Now, in traditional approaches to open source, what you have is you've got a company, excuse me, I don't know if I'm rushing through this. I mean, I'm nervous because I'm streaming again, but also, I don't know, I'm having fun. And I don't need to be talking about this at all. I was supposed to be working on the code, but I want to get this out there, whether or not, I was going to do this in a polished YouTube video, but we'll start with this. So traditionally when companies open source something, we're going to get to what I mean but when I say that Zerve is unironically unlike any other open source project out there, because I do believe it, but also I'm a crazy person. Usually when you're open sourcing something, you've got your application and you realize there are some reusable components in your application. And then what you do is you take those components and then you open source them. You publish them, you document them, you put them on GitHub, and you get people to go and try and use those components inside of their application. And there's nothing wrong with this approach. I think this approach is this is just how open source is done. It's the way to do it. But I think there's a lot of value in another approach where you actually open source the full stack. You're not just open sourcing bits and pieces, you're open sourcing the actual integration between the front end and back end as well, and those full code bases. So you might be wondering, aren't there some open source systems that are like this? And there are. Oops, I've got my formatting messed up here. But yeah, a lot of these applications are source available, which are not actual open source. But here we go. The problem here is even if it is open source, it might be a problematic license, because when I refer to non-free open source, oh boy, I'm so apprehensive about saying this. I'm gonna piss some people off when I call their open source non-free, because I do consider GPL licenses and the whole copyleft movement to be kind of, for lack of a better word, a poison in open source, because if your code is GPL licensed, then all of a sudden you can't use that piece inside of a proprietary application. So there's free as in freedom, and then there's free as in beer, and then there's free as in free speech, and all of these things get so confused. But rather than worrying about how free the code is, which it seems like GPL is all wrapped up in, I'm interested in worrying about how free the people are who use the code. And I want the people to be free to profit off of the code if they want to. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Yeah, and I know that's going to upset some people, but yeah, I truly think that the most free version of open source is a liberal open source license, like what we're using on Zerve, which is the Apache 2 license. And the only provision on Apache 2 is that if you fork it, you just can't continue to use the same brand. So you can't take my brand, but you can take the code and do whatever you want with it and go hopefully make a bunch of money using it. That benefits all of us because we're all part of the same technical ecosystem here. So Zerve, of course, is properly open source. All of the components, not just the individual components, but the actual application itself. And I think there's a lot of value in that because it's a kind of a cohesive package. It's like a set of things that all work really well together. And it works on what you could describe as replaceable infrastructure. It runs on basically any Linux server right now. And we rely on external services for compute and storage, CDN, DNS, external messaging like SMS. But all of those services are easily replaceable. So in any case, you'll be able to deploy Zerve on a wide variety of services long into the future. And remember, Zerve is built out of these components. And what's great about it is the application itself, that is a useful application that helps you configure your app, it kind of acts like an example application for all of these components, which are open source. So as a result, I kind of tend to think of Zerve as an app framework. Even though it's not fully mature, it is already open source, and it does already kind of work in this way. So ultimately, I want to make app creation way, way easier. And yeah, as a framework, you can take the whole Zerve application, and like I said, if you copy it, you've got to change the name, but then it's your application, and you've fully cloned it. And then what you could do is you can turn off a bunch of stuff that you don't find useful from the Zerve application, and then you can go use the components that we provide to go add a bunch of other stuff. So that's why I consider Zerve to be like a full app framework, even though it's not mature and no one's using it this way, and the only Zerve app is Zerve itself. So yeah, I can understand why you might have some reservations about adopting this as an app framework today. If I were you, I would only be thinking about using Zerve to configure your app, using Zerve as a product. And that is a quick overview of sort of how I see Zerve and how it can provide value to people. It can sort of ease the bottleneck in your organization and allow your non-technical people at your company to directly modify the content inside of their application. So that's what I'm working on, and I'm about to dive like deep into the code because I've had kind of like coder's technical block. Like I've been not producing much code, and my code base has been in like this really awkward state. I've got it all committed right now, so like you can't see this mess that I've made. But I've got this note here, which is just like trying to wrap my mind around the workflow here. And now that we're going to go into code mode, I think I really need to switch this onto some lo-fi. Those hype tracks were a bit much, I think. So, working on the authentication system. And I need to build up a lot of context for you and also for me. It's been a minute since I've worked on this, so now is a great time for you to jump on in and see the mess that I've made. You know, like who's the previous developer on this project, and it was me. All right, so I'm in my code directory, and I can do yarn dev server. I'm just going to run that backend server component, the API component that we talked about. And it's running on 3888. And it doesn't really have a front end, so I'm not going to bother with the web browser. I'm going to jump over to Insomnia. And here's the sort of feature that I was most recently trying to add, is the ability to like change a user's username. And the reason I was having troubles with that is because of the way the auth stuff is stored on the back end, and I was like trying to wrap my mind around the backend user model, data model. And I still haven't figured that out. I'm like deep in a mess. So yeah, like I fully expect this to be very embarrassing for me because I'm figuring out an auth system, and a lot of people would say, you know, including me in a lot of circumstances, people would say, you should not be building your own auth system. It's the wrong thing. You should be like, you know, using an existing robust auth system. But the integration is going to be pretty deep. So honestly, even though everyone says not to build their own auth system, everyone seems to like have their own auth system. So like there's a big contradiction, and here I am perpetuating it because we've got a custom auth system here. So first let's take a look at the server side. This is the main file for the server. And we're setting up like SMS and email because our auth needs to be able to log in via phone or via email, or at least that's what we've built so far. You can ignore the store for now. Auth files is basically like a file system abstraction, and we're basically giving these auth files. We're giving access to a specific part of the file system to the auth system. So you can ignore the create Z container because that's basically just wrapping it and labeling it with auth. But here, instead of ignoring it, let me show you. Open up basics. We'll get the root Z. Even though I'm American, I'm trying to use the word Z because I think it's a little bit more fun to refer to it this way. But Z basically refers to just like the Zerve low-level API, and that's what we have here on the .z. Yeah, yeah, I'm laughing at your comment on the OAuth employee saying, yeah, no one should build their own auth systems. Yeah. The reason I'm building my own auth system primarily is I'm really nervous about building on external systems that might not work out. Like I've heard horror stories around, I think it was OAuth, but I'm really not going to like encourage anyone else to go build an auth system that's like, yeah, like I don't want people to have to build it themselves, but also I personally don't want to be at the whim of somebody else. If I'm having a trouble with my auth system, I need to understand it. Like that is the most important thing, me being able to understand and troubleshoot my own auth system. And if important parts of the auth system are behind some sort of wall or like inside of a black box in a different service, like it's just totally untenable for me. And also I want this to be a really simple system for people to use. So it can't like be this really complicated setup with all this auth process BS. Like it just needs to have like a simple working auth system for them out of the box. And when I say out of the box, I mean like when you're configuring it here with the code, like literally inside of create auth. So what are the 3 arguments here for create auth so far? Like I'm going to change this probably like before this stream is done. But these are the things that you're going to be, these are what are called the auth strategies. So basically here, this email is like kind of literally, it's called a Z action. And it basically means it's literally the ability to send an email. And this is literally the ability to send an SMS. So those are required in order to create these auth strategies where we're going to be verifying people based on their email or phone number. And then we're labeling the auth strategies here when we give it to the auth abstraction. And if you have feedback saying like, oh, this is probably too complicated and you're prematurely abstracting this stuff, yes, and also I have more to show you. What's funny is because email and SMS authentication work in almost an identical way, where there's basically like a little secret code that you send to the email or you send to the text message, and then you need to expect that within a certain time frame. They use the same abstraction under the hood. So create email auth strategy uses, like, calls this create generic thing. And all it does is says like, oh, there's the ability to send a generic message and there's an address. In this case, the address is the email. And there's a schema here that we're specifying. And the schema is necessary just for the Zerve infrastructure, which I talk about a lot on my YouTube channel, but I'm probably going to skip over a lot of that these days. But there's all this Z stuff in here, which is kind of like an API that is able to self-declare itself so that you're able to query for the API and ask what capabilities it has, basically. So that's why we've got literal JSON schemas here. In a lot of cases, that's going to be converted to real types. I wasn't expecting this type error, but honestly, there are type errors all scattered throughout this. Just because this is TypeScript doesn't mean I've like got it sorted. It still is a mess, but still, like, I'm very happy to be working in TypeScript and be working towards really great types, not just in this code base, but in your code base is kind of what I'm focusing on, or what I'm thinking about, is making sure that when you're using Zerve, either querying for data out of the backend, or if you're doing your own Zerve application and you have your own Z API, querying that way. So anyways, the email strategy and the SMS strategy are basically the same. They basically just say, oh, this is what my address type is. Hang on, I'm struggling to click on this. Click. This is infuriating. Anyways, like physically unable to click on this thing because the type popover is happening. Usually I've got a bigger window, so I don't think that'd be a problem. But I can also just click over here on create the SMS auth strategy. And yeah, all this basically does is sends you a text message. And this is the only code that's kind of specifically tying the SMS capability to the auth system. But most of this logic here is in create generic message auth strategy. And oh boy, there's a few type unhappiness in here, which I'm sorry, because that's going to make it hard to read. But because my brain has like seen this stuff, it's not going to be as intimidating. This is really unfortunate, though. I'd really like to fix it if possible. Oh man, I love this TypeScript error. This TypeScript error just breaks me sometimes. Type instantiation is excessively deep and possibly infinite. I actually really need to address, there's like a pull request on the repo right now, which I think might fix this, because it kind of makes some of my types more explicit rather than relying on TypeScript to do really impressive inference. Like, it would be impressive if it worked, and it doesn't work. So that's what I mean by like relying on impressive inference, because this type instantiation error basically is like TypeScript is giving up, saying, oh, I can't infer this deep. But yeah, like, I'm sorry, I expect things out of you for my programming language. My programming language, TypeScript, I have expectations. What the problem here is, there's also like the auth, which is creating the auth itself. And And this has its own sort of layers of logic, where there's some actions that are being exposed. And this is more of the Z logic. And I really need to revisit a lot of this stuff. Some of the stuff can be simplified, cleaned up. But let's try and tell the story quickly in the code, and then I'll go and finish the story with regards to everything else. So, and we'll try it out with an email authentication because I don't have a way to test my phone number without doxing myself. So we're going to be logging in with email right now. So auth with email. Okay. And this, I don't care if you know my email address because this is the zerve.app domain. This is my domain for Zerve. And this is an expired token, so there's nothing really compromised here. So there's auth/create session. Well, first of all, let's see what the Z API exposes. We get Z. We get this is considered the root of the Z API, which is .z on the path. And it tells us what the children is. And we can also do .type. And is it giving us the type? Oh, it just wouldn't send when I hit enter. And we can see it's a container, and a container contains an auth. This part is a little confusing because instead of this, we can just go to auth. Now we can see what happens when we get auth. And it has a bunch of children. It has something called, these are probably actions, logout, logout all, create session, and user. Interesting, interesting, interesting. So these are all children. So we know we could do /user. And if we try to do this, it's probably going to say we're not authorized. So this is the section of the API that we're not allowed to access, whereas these actions, creating a session, logout all, and logout are all things that you technically don't need a session for. Although you do need secrets, of course, to do logout actions, but they're not, the actions themselves are not protected. So if you want to sort of see what the behavior is of logout, for example, you can't get it because it's an action that you're expected to post to, but you can get the .type of it. And if you get the .type, we can see that it's an action, and it expects this payload, where it expects an authenticator ID and a session ID. And this is what you need in order to log out. This is what you need to send to the server. And it has a response, which is a type null. So if you log out successfully, it'll just return null. And that's what this is saying on the .type. And this is behavior of the Z API. That's whenever you see this like .z in the path, then yeah, you're going to have the ability to query for the .type of things and actually get the JSON schema of what's here. So you can post to logout, for example, this object. But we need to do a post to create session. So what are we querying for the create session? Or what are we sending when we create a session? We need to send, so this is saying one of, basically there are different options of things that you can send. You can either send an object with strategy always equaling email. So here, let me just show you the actual thing. So you can either, strategy here is set to email, and the payload is set to an address, and the address is whatever address the message needs to be, like because it's an email strategy, we're going to be emailing. The address is this, otherwise it would be like a phone number. And the token is going to be, according to the JSON schema on the other thing, it's going to be null. And you send null when you're requesting a login via this email address. So I'm going to request a login. It looks like it worked because it returned null. So now I'm going to literally check my email. Oh, I'm hearing email noises. And it gave me the code. And quickly, before the timeout runs out, let's just see what the create session has done for us so far. So here's the payload. And what we do is we do strategy.authorize, where we try to see if the strategy is ready to give us an authorization. But in this case, it wouldn't have. It would have returned null. So inside of strategy.authorize, let's take a look at that. I'm sincerely sorry for the red squiggly lines. I'm really upset about that because I have to share this code with you now. But yeah, what authorize does is I identifies your address and creates an address key. It reads the address file, so there's data that's associated with your address key. And if you have an existing authentication request, then it needs to handle that, which we'll get back to in a second. But for now, we assume that you don't have an authentication request because you probably didn't have the authentication file, because for the first time this email logs in, it won't recognize you. So there won't be an auth request. Then we'll create a new token, and we'll create this auth request and do handle message send, which is basically the equivalent of sending an SMS or sending the email to whoever with the code. And it includes the token right here. So this is the secret token. And now, the email has been blasted off, and we need to go and write down the file that we were using to keep track of this email address. So we go and save that file back down here. And that's basically it inside of the auth strategy. And then that's it for here, because the strategy authorization will be null. So all this stuff will be skipped. This is the actual logic of creating the session, but we're skipping over all this stuff because strategy authorization is null so far. But now we're going to come back in, and it's going to work. Here's the code, pasting from my email. Address is not defined. Okay, this was legitimately unexpected. But like I told you, I was screwing around with this code pretty bad before, like 5 days ago, and then my brain got into a mush, and then that was the last time I touched it. So this annoying error is actually probably expected, in the sense that I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. Object.authorize. Address is not defined. So we're inside of the .authorize function, it sounds like. So authorize is right here. And address is not defined. Okay, yeah, so surprise, surprise, there's like some type errors somewhere in this big block of redness. Like, that's the exact sort of error that would have been caught. Address is not defined. Okay, just for the sake of things, I will go ahead and say console.log the payload. And I'll also put a little message saying that we're in the message authorize. So that way we know where we are. And we're going to come back, send the request again. Message authorize. Okay, well, this is looking correct. The address is here. And now it's upset because there's no pending auth request. And that's actually a result of like things working, because that's what happens when it works. It basically clears the authentication request. So this is kind of annoying, because now in order to reproduce it, we need to like go through the full cycle. No big deal. I was expecting this to be painful. There's a reason I didn't even like tweet about this live stream, because I was hoping like no one would watch it, but it would hopefully at least get me to point my brain in the right direction. So I'm thinking maybe this .authorize part is fully working, because actually I think there are more changes in the auth module itself. So the strategy authorization, let's see if there's any references to address down here. Okay, this is just a different type error that's unrelated to this, but it's going to be relevant not long from now, I hope. So I'm really suffering because my type safety is not where it needs to be right now. And I don't think I have too many excuses right now, aside from the fact that this Z infrastructure relies on some crazy inference that TypeScript suffers from. But yeah, this is what it's like getting into a code base that I haven't been into for a little while. I mean, it's painful and really slow. I hope it's as painful as it is for my audience. For my audience as it is for me, because geez, this is not going so well. So this invalid auth attempt, I think this is a legitimate error. You can see this is like not the There was a different one that said not found. Yeah, so these are the legitimate errors. These should be like authorization errors. This is not the right type of error because it's showing up as an internal server error, but we should be providing a better error to the user, like a more specific authorization error. But, so yeah, this isn't the problem. And now we're in the slow process where I need to like constantly be emailing myself in order to replicate this, which is just lovely. Okay, so here we're in the auth create session. And this is after the strategy authorization. So we should see both the strategy authorization eventually and the payload. And we need to go back through this really slow process. The server restarts itself, fortunately. So I've gone and sent myself an email. And then we'll come back and see what we see. Address is not defined. That's what we were afraid of here. Strategy authorization is null. Okay, so no, yeah, it's not working. Okay, so we need to go into this interesting part of the strategy authorization, which I was probably too scared to even explain earlier. I think I totally glossed it over. So, but it's important. This is exactly like how this is like basically magic link, single click, links. This is just a really simple authentication system. So if there's a previous authentication request, we're going to need its token and the request time, so we can basically verify that the token matches. Here we're checking if there's the payload.token, because remember, if the payload.token is null, we're attempting to send out a fresh authorization request. We're going to send you a new code to your email or phone number. But this is if you do provide, this chunk of code is if you are providing the auth token, saying you're trying to basically log in all the way now. So first we verify that the token that was stored matches the token that's coming in. Oh, look at this. Who's this? Address? I think this is probably where our issue is coming from. So we should probably just take address and destructure it from the payload. Okay, and we can just do that up here. Const address from the payload. And now we don't need to do that. And now address should exist. Okay, I hope we fixed our issue and we can move on, because I wasn't even trying to work on this part at all. This was just a terrible distraction. The goal is to get you to make your own usernames on the auth system. I think that's going to be really important and great. But yeah, like we need to be able to create a session first, because you need, like, the logged in user is the one who's creating the username. Okay, we've got a different issue here. It's basically looking for an authenticator. Now, okay, this actually is something that I expected. This means we're getting there, as terrible as it is. In fact, maybe I should make a stub authentication strategy that just always allows you to create a new session. Should we try that? That'll speed everything up, won't it? And I've been meaning to make one for testing anyways. So here are two authentication strategies, our email and phone, but what if we like disabled those and we said test? And then we're like, this is the test, or just create test auth strategy. And then here you'd like put in the annotation for it, like test 0, or like that this would be picked up while you're like running tests. While you're doing automated testing, you don't want to be sending emails and text messages. You can't do that. So like you could use this to test the auth system and basically like verify through some other mechanism that by basically coming back with the code in your test. Okay, but I'll just come over here and I'll import this from auth. And I'm going to do everything the right way now. So like here on the auth package, I'll just duplicate create email strategy. And I'll auth test strategy. I'll change the name of the function to create test auth strategy. And it's not an async function. I remember that much. And then it gets the note or the tag string. Okay, and it doesn't return a promise. It just returns the auth strategy. And then we're not going to use the generic strategy here, and it's not an email thing anymore. Don't need to get this definition either. Okay, so the auth strategy has between 2 and 3 type arguments. Great. Love type arguments. Otherwise known as generics. Okay, so like what is the payload for when you're... Okay, this is super confusing, but basically this is what the auth strategy is. It's an object that has authorize schema, authorize, and get details. Great! So I'm just gonna like, I don't know, copy this, and then we're gonna come over here to our test auth strategy. We're gonna return this basically. So what is the payload schema? Well, for now we can just use a null schema because we don't actually need you to send anything. It's just gonna succeed every time when you try to authorize using the test strategy here. Now, from schema, this is the magic that basically allows us to do this. Authorize payload schema. Oh, right, because we're copying, this is the generic. Oh, actually, it should be null, right? This is what we just said. We literally just said right here that the payload is going to be null. Sorry, my brain is like working at slow capacity here. A bit of a headache going into this whole stream. And it also has access to the files. Okay, well, I don't think the test module needs that, but we might as well import the type. No, maybe we won't import the type and we can just delete this altogether. But it returns a promise. So basically this is an async function. And it's going to get null as the payload. This is weird that I'm doing this way. That we've type annotated payload is like, oh yeah, it's always going to be null. Like, why are we even getting that as an argument? And it's going to be, so it's a promise. So all we need to do is return a strategy authorization, which includes authorization details. So what is a strategy authorization? It's probably an object. It basically has a strategy key and an auth time. Great. So auth time is like going to be one of these whole date.now, because I kind of treat time like just a number of milliseconds, because treating it like a date is a pain in the ass. Back here on the server, when you constantly need to be serializing to JSON. And the strategy key, is that supposed to come in from somewhere? I mean, because the strategy key itself, does the strategy know its own key? I don't know. And then get details. It's a promise of details. And details, I do remember this part actually. It's a generic. So it can be anything. So get details is going to be like this. Simple get details. Okay. So auth strategy probably, I'm expecting some type errors. I have a really fast computer, and like TypeScript is still so slow on this computer. Like I'll find myself waiting for TypeScript for 5 or 10 seconds. I'm just like, what are you doing? But also TypeScript is magic, and I wouldn't ever be able to build something like it. So Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully I can. So the payload schema. Oh, okay. So this is going to be basically type of null schema, and then one other argument. What was the other argument before details? Because I think details is an optional argument. Oh, details is the second argument. Great. So that's just like empty object, isn't it? The implementation is missing, you say. Well, it's funny because it doesn't look missing to me. I suppose I did forget to mark this as async. Hang on, what's the issue? This expression is not callable. I'm sorry? Is this the error? Is something wrong there? I'm like glancing at chat to see if there's anyone who's going to save my butt here, but I have no clue. Has no call signatures. Oh my gosh. This is what I mean about TypeScript. Like, I fixed this error 20 seconds ago, and I was looking at some spurious TypeScript error for 20 seconds, just staring at it, and then it goes away because it wasn't a real error. It seems to be happy now. It seems to know that I'm doing the right thing, except for the strategy key. Literally, I don't understand where this is supposed to come from. What's the second and third arguments here? On authorize. Strategy files. And yeah, so whatever. This isn't going to break anything. Now, maybe we can finally get back to work. We can use this create test auth strategy. Oh, the problem is it's not actually being exported from auth. Is that the correct file name? Auth test strategy. All right. Okay. Now we should be running our new server. So what's it look like now? Our strategy here is going to be equal to the same as this string here. So let's just see what happens if we do this. It's going to be like, oh, I can't find. Yes, it's saying this is actually like this is coming from JSON schema. It's telling us, oh, we expected. Yeah, allowed value must be test. Oh, okay, let me try changing this to test. Maybe it's still not going to work. Oh, still a problem here. Yeah, the payload is supposed to be null, huh? Okay then. No. Oh, actually, here, let me duplicate this request. Auth test create session. And now, create session should work basically every time inside of our test auth strategy that is being given a null payload. Great. Now we have an easy way to get to this error. Oh man, I've never been so happy to see this error. Classic. Okay. You can't say we didn't make any progress, right? We got to the next error, so cause for celebration. Okay. Oh wait. In fact, I'm remembering now what the strategy key was, or what. Yeah, because there's like so many different identifiers here in this auth system. It's like, should I even make a new document here to try to explain like identifiers, IDs in this auth system, right? So there's like the strategy name. This is like email with capital E or SMS. And they're the dictionary. It's like the object of strategies. It's the key in the object of strategies. passed to auth. So here on our server, this is the strategy name, and this are the strategy name. So it's actually phone and not SMS. So, okay. I don't know if I'm doing this to help myself or help anyone watching, but trust me, I kind of hope that you don't have to watch this and sit through it. Hopefully you can just enjoy a nice functional authentication system that allows you to change your username. And that's part of the issue that we're facing here inside of auth, is that we're mixing up the different identifiers. We're using the strategy key, I think, as the actual username. And instead, we want that to be your default username. Because if you log in for the first time with email or phone number, like on a technical basis, it's so much easier if you have a username. It's just not like a pretty username. So what it is, it's basically like a hash of your phone number or email address. So like, you know, you're not revealing anything by if somebody sees it, but like it's a very long and inconvenient username. So you're probably gonna have a workflow where you encourage your users to change and set their username pretty early if that's something that you care about, if they need a username in your application. A lot of applications don't care about usernames though. So now we're able to basically fast track the strategy part, and we can finally this was so painful. This was so dumb just to get to this part where we're struggling inside of auth. Okay, so we know we get to an error somewhere after strategy authorization. We can delete some of our log statements, I think, because we know this we're getting here happily every time. But the problem is we're trying to write down on /authenticators. So what I'll do, because I want to show you the shape of the data that actually is being saved to the file system. I'm going to pull that up. Okay, so I'm in my home directory here, home directory /Zerve. So that's basically the file that Zerve grabs when you run the main app, when you run the main server, right? So that's defined up here. It basically is like finding, oh, your home directory /Zerve, default data dir now has the full path. Create core data is a data abstraction, as you can imagine, and you're telling it what the thing is. Starting data dir, so it also tells you when the server starts up. Where are you? It says, oh, this is the exact place where all your data is. Isn't that nice to know? It sure is nice to know, server. Thank you for telling me what data you're using. Now, all the good stuff with regard, I mean, a lot of this stuff is like junk or experimental or specific to parts of the server while I was developing it. The good stuff is inside of auth. I'm actually going to delete this though, because I don't want it sullied by previous things. It looks like at some point, instead of deleting it, I had renamed it to backup auth. Maybe I'll just do backup auth 2. Isn't that nice? So now when we run our server again, I'm just going to Control-C and start it again. It should create auth and also create a few directories inside of auth. And we'll see what sort of data shows up in here. Okay, so it's created authorizations and strategies. If you're like laughing at me because it's like, shouldn't you already know this? It's like, I'm kind of being reminded as we go. So this is just as new to me as it is to you, okay? Not really. So let's try creating an authorization. Remember, we have our shortcut way of doing it, create session with our test strategy. So let's see what happened. It went and created a new folder for us, and it created something in the authenticator folder. This is under the authorizations. I'm going to open this in the code editor and see. I'm just going to hit save so that it formats. And here we can see the strategy key as well as the authenticator ID. So 2255. So basically, this same file is going to get used in the future. So the creation time will stay the same even if we come back and go again. And here you can see from the error, at least, it's probably accessing the exact same thing. Okay, no, so it's creating new sessions every time, but under the authenticators, it's using the same authenticator. So that's basically the equivalent of like the ID associated with the email address in the other auth method. And it corresponds to the ... test. It corresponds to the strategy key. So basically, because this is always being provided as the same thing, then we're always basically logging in as the same we're kind of logging in as the same user. That's kind of what we're saying here, is that every time like you succeed at logging in as this user, and the user is sort of identified within this auth strategy as diff. But that's within this auth strategy. So the auth module itself, this is where it gets really unpleasant and scary. The auth module itself is responsible for keeping all these sorted in the correct strategies, because there can be different authentication strategies that are all, they need to be able to authenticate just within themselves. It's like my strategy does not, like if I'm authenticating GitHub, I don't want to say, oh yes, you can also log in as Google user. It's like, no. GitHub logs in as GitHub. Phone numbers log in as phone numbers. So that's kind of why there's this file directory structure where for each auth strategy, there's a different folder, and these are the different authorizations. But then also what's going on inside of here. Oh, this is the data that the strategy uses itself. Okay, this is kind of helpful for my own self, and just saying this out loud. So the strategy is basically, this is the data that the strategy owns for itself. And the test strategy doesn't care about it. It doesn't save anything in here. But for the email and the SMS, and if we eventually do OAuth, which we probably will eventually need to do, OAuth, you need to save data. You need to save, like, what is the token? What time did we send this email? What was the code that we sent to the SMS? And in the case of OAuth, it's this other stuff, tokens that you need to hold. And all of that is specific to the strategy and is kind of considered private to the strategy. So let's close that, because we don't have to worry about that. That's working. But here we have authorizations. And authorizations has something called authenticator.json. And then beyond this, we still need a new folder for users. And that's kind of the new thing, is that authorizations used to be kind of considered users. And that's really broken. And now it's properly nested here. So inside of authorizations, rather than it just being a list of users, it's a list of auth strategies. So these are the authorizations for each strategy. Okay, so now I'm going to open this file up again. We just had it open a second ago. But now I'm like thinking properly about it, maybe. Authenticator.json. Okay, so basically what this file means is it means that, hey, the auth strategy gave me the go-ahead. And we now have this saved. So this isn't necessarily a session, but we're going to use this file to associate it with an actual user. And that is what's next. Let's see what's going on with the error, though. Let's see what exactly when this is happening. We're trying to write, or no, we're trying to open. We don't know if we're trying to write or read. It doesn't really matter. We're basically trying to access this file, which is a session file inside of authenticators. So I think it's trying to write the session file, which would make sense here because it's succeeded at authenticating, and the next thing it does is it goes and writes the file. And look, under authenticators, it's trying to use the key. This is what's known as the authenticator key, the strategy key. Yeah, exactly. Well, okay. God damn. So complicated. It's actually, I guess, known as the authenticator ID, and the strategy key is the unhashed version of it. Blah. Blah, blah, blah. So let's see where we're actually using authenticator ID. Gotta love how all this stuff is kind of in my way. I might zoom out just for a second. Apologies if you can't see this. I was hoping this concept of authenticator ID would be, pretty specific to pretty isolated to the auth module. And I'm looking at it over here. It's like somehow it's present on the client. I think the client is using it effectively as the user ID. Isn't that lovely? It really is. Like, this is actually doing exactly that, where it's using the the client side is using using the authenticator ID as the user ID, but we now need a new concept of user ID. So that's what we're getting to. So I'm going to open it up. So is like the thing we're trying to deprecate. And then there's also user ID. So basically, authenticator ID is the within one authenticator with one strategy. And the user ID is a under users folder defaults to the authenticator ID. And actually, because of the way the authenticator ID is created, I don't want to deprecate it, I'm realizing. The authenticator ID is important because it takes the authenticator key and the strategy name, and it hashes them. So it's actually the strategy key. So the strategy name plus the strategy key hashed is the authenticator ID. And this is the key within one strategy, the strategy key. And then strategy name plus strategy key. The reason we take the hash of the name plus the key is we want to have a unique identifier in the system for, this is like one authenticator. Basically, this is one way that users can be, that a user can be authenticated. So one user can have several authenticators, but they're each going to have their own authenticator ID. And if you're logging in with an authenticator for the first time, and basically you're given the go-ahead, like, here, you're allowed to log in, and there's no user ID associated with this authenticator because maybe this authenticator file is being created for the first time. What you need to do is basically you need to come up with a new username, and a safe username, or a pretty damn safe way to have that unique username is use the authenticator ID, because it's going to be a really long string that's unique across all of your different authenticators. So there won't be any conflicts unless your username just happens to have like this random, like it would be like a once in a, it would never happen because first of all, you would never have a long, ugly username. But then of course you would need all those characters to line up. So basically that's a good way for us to come up with a default user ID, is the authenticator ID. Okay, so this file has been somewhat helpful for me actually. Now let's go into auth, where all of the good bugs are. And we're still somewhere inside of create session. Create session's got the good stuff. So here's create session. Create session payload schema. Oh, I see. I think this is actually asking TypeScript to do some inference that I don't expect it to be able to do, so I need to find a way to turn this off gracefully, because usually when you're creating Z-action, you need to specify statically what the JSON schema here is, And the reason it needs to be statically declared is so that way the JSON schema to TypeScript is able to properly give you the inference of this payload as it's coming into your action implementation. And in this case, we are dynamically generating it because it's kind of dependent based on what strategies are available. So yeah, whatever, whatever. What that means is I should actually go and provide the best payload type I can here, so that this isn't, unknown. It's very it's accusing me of like, oh, you don't even know what this type is. It's like, yeah, I know it. I just don't have a easy way to define that in one place. Okay, so we're getting past here auth create session. So we know that we're getting into the strategy authorization block here. And this block is like a page long. It goes all the way down to here. So at least it's pretty flat procedure here. So yeah, this is just like a long procedure that we're following when we're creating the session. If prev user is not equal to user, oh, I see. This is if we're basically going to be writing to the user file. But here, look, you can see that we're referring, when we're doing some like writing to the user, this is where we write to the user file. It's the authenticator JSON path and the authenticator ID that's where we're storing it, which is not right, because we're going to need the user ID. So there's the authenticator JSON path. And like we're close here to the bug, I think. So like I said, the authenticator ID is the hash of the strategy name plus the strategy key. I could have just read the source code. Who needs to make notes? Authenticator JSON path. We're already inside of, we already have what's known as authorizations files. Okay, so authorizations files is basically for this particular strategy, it corresponds to this folder. No, sorry, it corresponds to this folder. And then, so it does manage to write the authenticator JSON. Here's the place where we are reading. I see. Okay, so this part is all kind of making sense. When we're creating this, we also kind of need to specify the user ID on the authenticator. Well, let's see. Oh yeah, because here we are creating the authenticator. Oh, and look at this. This is so confusing. I was clearly in the middle of the whole project because this is called user, but it's typed as authenticator file data. So I'll call this authenticator. Okay, and then also prev user needs to be called prev authenticator. Okay, so we haven't actually changed any behavior, but at least this makes more sense. And then, yes, when we're coming up with this, in this case, because we're inside of create session, there's not a previous authenticator here because we're like doing this little callback behavior because we don't have the authenticator. So this is like when the authenticator is being created for the first time. It needs to refer to the user ID, but how does it know what the user ID is? And by the way, is that within the authenticator file data? Oh, again, a bad name here. User info schema. No, this needs to be something else. Authenticator data schema. Gamma. All right. Well, if anyone's in chat right now, if anyone's listening, if anyone's around, just give me a chat. Let me know that you're here. I kind of don't expect anyone to be around because this content is like pulling teeth. If anyone is here or is watching this, I hope you know that my YouTube channel is not nearly as boring as this. This is the painful stuff over here. But in any case, thanks for the interest. Hopefully this app will be useful someday. This is an important part of it because once you're able to set your username, we can give you like a URL because we can constrain your username to URL-friendly characters, and we can give you like a subdomain. Should be some functional stuff. And then you're going to query your subdomain from your application to get all your configuration and content and whatever else your non-technical people want to edit. And you don't want to make an admin dashboard. So that's why you've been waiting for this app to exist for your whole life. You just didn't even realize it. Okay, so here, like, we're trying to save into the authenticator. We're saving into the damn wrong spot, but we need to save into the user ID. Oh, wait, the prev authenticator. Wait, so now authenticator... Wait, so yeah, the user ID might have already been here. Okay, yeah, wait. So authenticator file data. It refers to the schema, and this schema has authenticator ID, and this is the authenticator file, so this is basically its own ID. The strategy key and strategy name, those are helpful for reference, but you really do need the user ID. And that's a string, and that would be what we know as a required string. So the tricky part is going to be when the username needs to change and we need to go and update like several files at once, which is a very tricky thing to do safely. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I don't think it's going to be that much of a problem, actually. If we get like 1 billion users, I would say that would be a big problem because this whole thing is running on one server and it's not going to scale like crazy. But hey, if you've got less than like 1 million users, I would say this should work. And if you have more than 1 million users, and you want to use this, then pay me to fix it, because these shortcomings can absolutely be addressed. Okay, it should be giving me an error here. It should be saying like, don't you really want a user ID here? Yes, TypeScript, get with the program. My God, that takes forever. Okay, user ID is going to default to the authenticator ID, which we didn't like this plan earlier, but this makes sense as the default here. And then 20 years later, TypeScript is going to be like, wow, actually, you did a great job there. 19, 18, 17, 16. Okay, I don't have time to wait for 20 years. Okay, we make the writing happen. Okay, so now we can get the user ID off of the authenticator. Probably other things as well, but the user ID I care a lot about because we are going to write the session, and we need to make sure that actually we kind of have the same workflow that we had before, where we're going to read the user and make sure that the user basically still trust this authenticator, it's probably what we should do. At least we need to read the, we need to like make sure that the user file exists, because we are going to save information into the user file. But before we do that, I'm going to take a break because I do want to stream for a little while longer. I wasn't planning on streaming for such a long time, but I'm going to take a little bio break, and I'll check you back here soon. Okay, I'm back. Oh, I want to listen to the music too. I hope it's been enjoyable. Although if you're on the VOD, of course there's no music. Here, look at my face. Shout out to my 1 viewers. My 2 viewers. Oh wow, a second ago Twitch was telling me I had 1 viewers. And now I think I'm probably the 2nd viewer. But yeah, thanks for tuning in to whatever it is that I'm up to here. You probably have not been paying attention, but I'm working on an authentication system, and working on making it so that there are user IDs on this auth system. And then once user IDs are like a concept behind the scenes, making it so that the user can change their user ID should be pretty straightforward, or at least that's the hope. And yeah, back into it for a little while. Done with the BRB. I am right back, and we have the user ID coming out of the authenticator. So before we write to this session file, we need to make sure that like the user exists and the user folder exists, because the user folder is where we're going to put the session. So when the username changes, all we basically do is we need to move the user folder. And all of the sessions are going to be inside of it. So when the username changes, the sessions should continue to work. Kind of. I think the sessions might depend on the user ID as well. So like the session that changes the user ID is able to basically change its own session over to the new user ID, but the other sessions might not get the message. I don't think that's the worst case though. Like you don't change your username very often. And if you get logged out of the other accounts, that also sounds like a good kind of a good security feature. I mean, maybe we should just delete all the other sessions when you change your username. I don't know. What am I, qualified to build an auth system? No, I mean I've built several auth systems before, but yeah, no, it's good to keep it simple. It's good to keep it. I actually think it's good to keep it in the open, despite vulnerabilities potentially being out there. But we're going to keep it pretty simple and straightforward. And if there are issues, they will surface in good time, and we will address them when they come up. I'm not recommending anybody use this right now, except for myself. Not everyone is as brave as I am, right? So we're going to do files, basically create directory, and make sure that the user exists. Or what we can do, so what we do with the authenticator is we attempt to read it, basically this way. Oh, and also what we need to create way out here is we need to create like the files for our users, or the directory for our users itself, because we only want to like make sure that the users directory exists when the application starts up. So that happens like way out here, because here all of these functions are, and the stuff below is implemented inside of create auth. And here what we're doing is we're basically making sure that the auth directory exists by calling make dir with an empty path. And then we can create additional system files. So that's what's happening here is like there's different kind of namespaces of files that are being created. And we can create one more called users files. Let's just call them users files. Users folders files. I don't know. Even though it has bad grammar, I kind of like it. It feels more correct. And it's just create system files, the place where the rest of the files are, which is from the files is our root that we have, that we're being given. And then we say users. Thanks for bearing with me while my brain is totally fried, but like progress is being made. I think like I'm confident now that I have unstuck myself. So going live at least got me out of my little funk here. So users files. Now what we want to do is we want to do users files dot z dot create dir, make dir, and we want to await this, and we need to pass in a path. We can pass in an empty path, and this will make sure that the user. Oh, wait a second. We only need to do this once. Again, I was just talking about how we only needed to do this once out here. So now we know that the users directory should exist. Oh, that expression is not callable. I actually have to do .call. It's not super intuitive when you're using the Z API from inside of your code base. It's really more optimized for exposing it over the network and creating a GUI out of it by querying for the Z API. But that's that. Inside of the Z API, because users files is actually known as a Z container. It shouldn't be any. It should be properly inferenced by TypeScript here. but it's a Z container which contains a bunch of actions, basically, that you can take on those files, but theoretically not out of any other files. So it's kind of a strict namespace of the files, like a section of them. Okay, so now when we say make dir, what we want to really do is we want to make dir the user ID. We want to make sure that the user ID is a legitimate folder. And then inside of that, we want to create a new file for the user. So it's basically write file, I think is what it's called. Write JSON. You specify the path, and the path is going to be join the user ID with the name of the user file. And it's going to be the same file name in every user. Oops, I never got my audio working, so hang on quickly while I... Okay. I just wanted to hear the music in my earbuds. So again, it's makedir.call, and it's writejson.call. So now we need to specify, like, this is the user file, value. So what is user data? We should probably declare that here. And yeah, this is where we're going to query for the path. So say const, we're basically just going to user path, user data path is here. And we're going to declare that first because the user data might already exist. So we're going to basically try to get the user data if it's there. In the same way that we do this, where it's like, it could be undefined or it could be something good, and we just do a readjson.call. Priv authenticator. Oh, am I in the right place? No. So the user data is going to be equal to user data or undefined. I'm trolling, of course, because user data is not defined anywhere. And it should probably be a schema. The reason we use JSON schema even for this like backend data is because we want to be validating for it like internally. We want to, like before we're reading the file, we don't want to crash most of all. So like if the file is malformed for any reason, we don't want to break. So that's why we're using JSON schema for all this stuff. So like const user data schema. Looks like we already have username schema. I don't know who's using this yet, but user data schema is going to be basically an object schema. So this is what an object schema looks like. It's got all this junk. It has required as well as properties, as well as saying that there are no additional properties, which I think would be a nice default. But so we'll also say export type user data, which is the type I was referring to below. And then we're going to use JSON schema to TS to infer this user data schema. But it's the type of this user data schema, and it's as const. It's really important to declare it with as const if you expect the type inference to work. So here, for example, you can see the type inference is working for stored session. And it's able to know, hey, it has all these things according to the JSON schema, which is the stored session schema. And we're going to do the same thing here, user data schema. Let's just say that username is here, because that's, maybe the username isn't here. Maybe there's something called authenticator keys, and maybe primary authenticator. Because you've probably seen this on all sorts of websites and stuff, like when there's like a primary email address versus like a secondary email address. And it's like, what's primary really mean? It's like, it mostly means that in the username field, where you're sometimes able to type your username or your password, that or your email or your username, like you'd put that email, your primary email there. But it's like the concept of primary email is not something I'm certain about. It's also for password recovery. But for now, like I'm just gonna have a set of authenticators for every user, and there's not gonna be like one authenticator that's the primary one. So we're gonna delete all this other stuff. Authenticator keys is the only thing that we have, and it's gonna be required for sure. And it's not a string; it's an array. It's an array of, and for each item in the array, we're gonna specify that schema right here. It's just a key, which is a string. So what we're saying here, when we look at user data, it should be inferred, yes, that it's a string, an array of strings. That's the authenticator keys. And maybe there'll be additional stuff that's on the user data, but for now, when we go to create our user data, we specify, and this would be called the prev user data, I would say. And then we have our new user data. That was weird. There was like some song that just cut out to silence halfway through the song. Shout out to Stream Beats by Harris Heller. That's what we're listening to right now on the live stream. And it's really nice to know that I'm not going to get copy strike attacked from using this music. I wish I could just listen to normal music. But this is good stuff. I remember last time I was streaming, like when I was streaming the photo editor, the photo viewer content. I was so stressed out the entire time. Like I was like, oh, I don't want to waste your time. And I still don't want to waste your time. But also, like, I expect you to just not follow me if this isn't providing any value to you. So, yeah, I'm trying to be a little bit more chilled out on Twitch. Last time was a very like intense thing. I would like get up and I would go live before work for like 2 hours, like from like 8 a.m. or yeah, I would go live at 8 a.m. and oh man, just even having to stick to a schedule for streaming, so much pressure. But it was good for me too. It was really good to kind of get that that push out there, and being out there. And I was also really embarrassed by it. So embarrassed that I like took all those VODs down. Don't know where they are now, but also like I don't think they were very valuable because I don't know. The photo editor was just like a little hobby experiment. I was literally doing those streams because I was doing a talk. And I was like, oh, I need to have something to talk about. So I'm going to build this library. I'm going to learn all sorts of things about it. And it was if it was the talk that I was thinking about, it turned out to be a pretty good talk. I really enjoyed it. React Native EU 2018, maybe 2017. Because what I wound up doing is I built a photo viewer, like, you know, the photo viewer you pinch and zoom, you can swipe between different photos on like React Native. And then I wound up like putting the entire slideshow, or I basically used the photo editor for the presentation. Or, I don't know. I always love making presentations that are super meta. And like at the end of the presentation, you realize like, oh my God, I've been looking at this thing the whole time. I thought he was just like using this as an illustration for the technology, but it's like, no, this was the app. And it's just like the app just has presentation capabilities. And that's one of those things with Zerve that I wanted to work on, and I'm constantly tempted to work on, is to screw around with the content workflow. The recording and editing, and integrating that into it. Because right now what I do for content for this stuff is just like, I use Keynote. And it's like, so this is actually Keynote. It looks like, oh, it looks so legit. In my first couple of videos that I made, I was actually just on text edit. And like my slides and stuff were on text edit. But so when I'm like jumping around to the demo or whatever and talking about this stuff, I'm just clicking here in the sidebar. I'm not even in present mode, because present mode doesn't really give me the same access and the ability to kind of like click on things and highlight them. But so yeah, I'd love to have like a more polished workflow. But like I want Zerve to be part of the workflow. So like I'm using the Zerve app to basically set up the content, like headings and stuff like that, set up the titles and the different graphics that I'm showing. Because my dream is that like the ultimate like form factor for this sort of content is video, but also blog post. And I want to be able to generate and edit the video and the blog post together at the same time, which is a big distraction, if I'm being honest. Like I'd love that, and I do intend to kind of post blog alongside video for more serious publishing in the future, but it's a lot of work. I mean, if I were to make Zerve do that, that would be all Zerve does. And I need to do something that I think Zerve really will provide value for people, helping people like access the content of their own application is like, I've seen this exact problem every like company I've worked at, every piece of software I've worked on. There's always been some sort of like, you've wanted to have some sort of admin panel, some sort of dashboard where people at your company can go and tweak the app, but you just never have time to build it. So finally I'm building it, but it's more than that. It's part of a framework. It's part of an ecosystem. And yep, time to get off the soapbox and back into the trenches here. I was like middle of a bunch of important thoughts here where I'm like, okay, there's this user file. We try reading the user file, not through this path, but through the user data path. And it should equal the user data or empty. It will be empty most of the time. And then, yeah, we saw, where was the logic that we did here? Oh yeah, it's just like if the prev thing is not equal to the current thing. Basically, the implication here is that we might want to mutate the authenticator here, or give the authentication strategy some sort of hook. Yeah, Zerve is the content management system, exactly. But it's also super confusing because, yeah, Zerve is the content management system. That's like the product that I'm trying to like deliver ASAP. But it's also, I view it as a bigger thing than that. Like, because like for the nitty gritty, there's like an API service, there's a web app, which is like a Next app, and there's a React Native app. And these are all, part of the same system. They're all kind of tied together. They are the Zerve app, but they're also made out of open source components. And all these sort of components, they're all in a mono repo together, but they work really well together, and they can be published to NPM independently. So then I start to think like, oh, this is kind of like an example application for like a full-blown app framework. So that's how I see it going eventually. And eventually I even want to support like no-code functionality, so that way you can kind of add functionality just from the front end on this whole thing. So like, yeah, Zerve is a content management system, and I'm like trying to keep myself to just deliver a really great CMS. But ultimately I see it as like a broader ecosystem for app development that's like kind of self-contained, and it only depends on like services that are really easy to swap between. So yeah, the idea is you can take this whole Zerve application and clone it and make it your own thing, and rip out all the functionality that you don't care about, and then use the set of modules to plug back in to make the app do whatever you want to do. But my ultimate dream is that you won't even need to like fork the code, and we can like help you create an application just using the front end. Like I'd love to make it so that you can code from your smartphone, like without having to type, like use the smartphone keyboard, where like your coding is more of a GUI thing, where there would be no such thing as a syntax error. It's like you can still have all sorts of problems in your code, but a syntax error shouldn't exist because you're like kind of working with structural building blocks, kind of like Scratch, but for adults who are building real apps. So anyways, Zerve is the CMS, but and that's what we're working on now. But one day, hopefully, it'll be something bigger. And if you're interested, all the source code is open. Here, let me paste in chat just in case anyone cares. This repo, I mean, I'm deep in some changes right now. And if you look at like my most recent commit message, won't let me paste? Oh, it's because I'm using, okay. My most recent commit message is like, oh, I'm just committing whatever was here in my repo because I was like suffering from coder's block, or what I call coder's block. Basically, I was like, I had made some changes to the auth system and then like had gotten confused and stuck and then distracted with other stuff. Like I've been working on this slideshow that I've been showing you. And it's such a tricky thing to be a founder and like bounce around between all these different things. I certainly struggle. But it's good to see you around here, Creekburn. So here's where we're writing like the new authenticator file, and now we're writing a new user file here. Prev user data. User data. Whoa, this is very, very, very wrong. User data is either equal to the prev user data, or we're going to create something, and it's going to be a new user object. And here I'm doing this little callback pattern. I don't know if I like it or not, but I'm going to do it. Okay, so the prev user data might be here. So here, it's basically the authenticator keys. What was it called? I just was looking at this seconds ago. Authenticator keys, and it's an array. And it's an array that has the authenticator key that we just have. So authenticator.key, probably. Oh yeah, we have authenticator ID. Wait, is it authenticator keys or authenticator ID? It's a good thing I made this little reference here. Authenticator ID. So what is an authenticator key? That's not a thing. These are authenticator IDs. So basically, these are all the authenticators that the user file is allowing to sort of authenticate as this user. So if the user data is not equal to the prev user data, that's the only case, and we need to be careful if we're mutating. We need to be careful if we're mutating that we're actually reassigning the user data, because we're using object reference here. But here, look, now we're only going to create this. We're only going to write the file and create this folder if the user didn't already exist, and it should be set with the authenticator ID. And now we have the user data. Not that the user data has anything useful, but being stored at this correct location implies that we've created a user, like a username. Okay, I'm going to delete this junk because that was copy pasta. And then now when we create the session, good. So when we create the session, we need the correct path. We make dir the user ID. So user files /user ID is the path. So we got to write our session here inside of user files, and then we need to make sure that we're on the right path. So this is user ID. And now, like, this should be, oh, maybe we can have a folder called sessions inside of the user. And what we would want to do is we would want to simultaneously make that at the same time we're making sure that the user is here. This is a little junky to have to be like making these folders so aggressively, but it's not going to be a big deal in practice. It's just a little, yeah. Am I using the file system for a database? That's a great question. Yeah, exactly. This is not your typical project. And I am using the file system for the database because I want this to be an extremely portable system. And there is a higher level to the system where, in theory, I can use basically like there's a blockchain actually where the data is stored as you make changes in a similar way to the way that Git is a blockchain. Like Git is already an obscure database that's on top of the file system, and everyone seems to love it. So I'm just going to make another one of them. We'll see if I get away with it or not. But it's not like an obscure like binary format like Git. It's just very simple, kind of JSON being written to disk. But it's in a blockchain format in the same way that, Git is also a series of blocks in a chain. And then there's the ability for you to write code against the blockchain where it's like, this is a function that says for every action, what's the current state? And then we can cache that state. So that way, when a new action comes in, we just have to like compute a few new states and we can save that. So that way we don't have to like do computation when somebody is querying for something because we've probably already cached it on the blockchain. But that's a whole nother topic. And yeah, you should be making fun of me for using the file system as a database here. This is clowny stuff, but it makes sense to do things that don't scale for startups often. And this is one of those things. So as soon as I get like my 1,000,001th user, like, the system's going to fall down, everything's going to stop working, and I'm going to need to come back in here and change this. But by the time I have a noticeable number of users, I'll probably have moved off of this like low-level file system because I'm trying to make this super portable, but also it's going to need to meet users' needs. So if there are users who have like lots of users, no big deal. Yeah, I mean, also Creekburn, like I agree with you that like, oh, the user data as plain text on the file system. That, I actually don't think that's worse than a database. Because a database is effectively storing all the data in plain text. And I'm not going to be doing anything, of course I still need to like hash my passwords and stuff like that. That's really important. But basically once somebody's on the server, they're on the server. If they're familiar like with Postgres, they're probably expecting it to be a real database. So in a sense, like they'll be caught by surprise because it's this just JSON on the disk, but it's no more secure or less secure than storing it in a database from that perspective. I'm not saying there aren't security problems with implementing my own auth system because I'm probably leaving vulnerabilities like scattered all over the place here, especially as I'm changing all of these things. So it's all part of the process, and I think it'll be a great like learning experience. Like I'm hoping to create content around this, and if somebody finds a vulnerability, I'll like make a video, praise them on that, and fix it. But yeah, one step at a time. The other thing is this application is not meant to have that many users. It's only meant to be like the people at your company who are reconfiguring your application. And in production, you're probably not going to rely, or I don't recommend that you rely on Zerve as part of your main user-facing pipeline. So Zerve will help you tell your application when you need to rebuild the application server side, or your server can connect to Zerve. We'll probably have a CDN for client side, but like when your client application tries to query for the data that is being configured, that's all going to be kind of handled through Cloudflare, and it's just a very simple CDN. The people who are actually logging into the application, there'll be very, very few of them. at least for now. And we'll see when we get to it. I did think about building on top of the blockchain system, and I'm kind of excited about the blockchain system, but I really worried about it, about not understanding like the auth system really well. So that's why I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. Yeah, I'm with you that like databases do sometimes encrypt at rest. It totally depends. Like for example, Postgres I don't think has that out of the box, but there's extensions that you can use for encrypting. Yeah, no, I appreciate you thinking through the things that like people are gonna pay attention to when they're trying to adopt it. And I've had to think very hard about how I structure it. Like, what sort of projects do I depend on from like a service perspective, and also from like an open source code perspective? Because I don't want to rely on things that are too complex. So like a database, like the database, I think needs to be integrated really tightly with this application to the point where this thing almost behaves like a database. So that's another reason I'm building on the file system. But yeah, there's certainly some huge concerns. And when I'm thinking about adoption as well, like I'm thinking about making things really palatable for users like years down the line, and maybe I shouldn't be, right? Like if I were trying to create a framework, an application framework for that to use like a year from now or 2 years from now, like I should probably be building upon Postgres, because that's like really like robust today and really easy to extend and build upon. But I'm trying to build a cohesive system that's like simple for people to understand the entirety of to the best I can. And if there's just huge chunks of responsibility that are stuck in the database, where ultimately I need to start writing a lot of SQL in order to optimize it properly, well, then I'm going to be in a world of hurt, and then now I need to teach people SQL. And I'm trying to have fewer things to teach people and not more things to teach people. Like it's hard enough to learn TypeScript and React and all this stuff. Ideally, you wouldn't have to learn like a syntax of a language. You would just tinker around like you do on Squarespace or something like that, and you should be building more quickly. So yeah, in a sense, I've prematurely optimized for the no-code kind of future of it, where I'm trying to kind of reinvent programming. In a sense, this is my own programming language. Like developers do that all the time when they shouldn't be, and it's a hobby thing. And for me, it's somewhat more than a hobby, but it's also not technically a programming language. Like it still is built on TypeScript and JSON schema and React, but I will need to build my own kind of no-code glue there, and I don't really know the best way of doing that. So that's going to be pretty fun to work on. Okay, so I don't want to be up here in the authorizations. I'm changing down here. When the user directory is created, we're also going to create a directory for those sessions. So we're on the users files. We're going to create sessions. And then we need to go and write that session. So we'll know if this succeeds because I'll be able to like go and make a request, and we should create our new user and create a session for that user. And we'll see all of that in the file system, which is laughable from a software, from a computer science perspective. If you've been trained normally, like we build on top of databases. We don't build on top of file systems when we're building like big production applications. It can be really tricky, Creekburn, to kind of target different skill levels. I've certainly struggled with that a lot because like we get exhausted as software engineers having to do the same thing over and over again. And it's like, yeah, we're used to like, yeah, having to do the same thing over and again, like when we go to a different project. But it's like, we also kind of have to reinvent things at every level of intellectual abstraction. Where it's like, step one, you learn how to like do very basic amounts of code and like work on any given project. And then there's like levels of understanding. And then you like, I also try to limit my understanding to an extent. Like, if I could work on low level stuff, but I like avoid low level stuff as much as I can. I try to stay as high level as possible because that's where all the utility is, kind of. I mean, I'm trying to, you know, ship an app on iPhone, Android, and web, and like it's, you know, it's hard enough to do that with a team of people, let alone as a single person. So I've got to like aggressively like keep my work as high level as possible. And this is an example of me failing to do that because I'm building an authentication system right now. But authentication system relies on the data, and the reason Zerve is a very simple database for a reason. Like, I had to start with the data in order to like build this into a no-code thing. And yeah, now maybe I'm thinking that I should have been building this auth system on the actual blockchain technology that is like at the heart of Zerve, that I do want to show you and talk about. But again, just for the sake of me being able to understand and troubleshoot the auth system on a really reliable basis, I still feel like this is the right direction for me. As absurd as it is to be like making an auth system on a file system, it's just crazy whacked out engineering. Like, this is not recommended for anybody. Okay, yeah, I've not been in a good cycle either. Usually I'm like going back and forth with the, like, I don't even know if I have a bug right now. Am I done? Okay, the server is running. I should, you know, be on a really tight feedback loop here. Okay, the path argument must be of type string, receiving undefined. Well, that's at least very actionable. Oops, join. So yeah, I've seen this error message before. Fortunately, I'm familiar with it. It basically means that one of these cases where we're calling join, probably on these new cases here, user ID, one of these things is undefined. So I'm just going to log out the authenticator. Okay, we'll see what it logged out. Creating session authenticator. Yeah. Oh. Because this authenticator already existed, it didn't have a user ID on it. So this is what I was talking about earlier, actually. When I was referencing how like I want to use JSON schema to validate the data that's coming off of the disk. This is exactly the reason why. It would have said like, oh, failed to read the authenticator or some other dumb message. But I'm just going to kind of delete all of this. Oh, look, there's a users folder. Okay, the users folder is still empty. I'm going to delete this whole everything inside of auth, restart the server. When the server starts up, we get the users folder and the strategies. Now let's go ahead and do this. Okay, we got a new error. New error is always a good sign. So here we can see that the strategy authenticator was created. Let's see if this has the good stuff. User ID. Yes, the user ID was wanted. Oh, in fact, the user ID folder exists. Oh, we had a lot fewer errors than I thought. Actually, we only failed to write down the session, which makes sense because we're probably writing it in the wrong place. But the user.json is now being created. Our lovely JSON files for our user system. This is just highly mature, yeah, programming. Yeah, Creekburn, I appreciate that. I could tell that you weren't like trying to push me off of my track here. What is Google OIDC? Is this Google like OAuth stuff? Oh, OpenID Connect. Gotcha. Yeah, that is the Google OAuth workflow for sure. I am interested in supporting OAuth on this app, but it's super low priority because honestly, like I feel like Apple has done it to me, where now Apple has like Apple ID, and on iPhone, if you support Google Auth, you also have to support Apple Auth. But on iPhone, if you just have login with email and phone number and one-time password, then you don't have to support Apple Auth. So it's kind of interesting to me. Apple Auth, though, is really nice for users, though, because of the security or the privacy that it offers. But yeah, I mean, when you accept just random email addresses off of the internet, it's not like you're being super selective about like knowing your users. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah, it's like, yeah, being out of the mobile space and being in the web space, like I feel like a lot of developers will bounce back and forth between that. And I've even seen it in myself where like it's really hard to keep all of it in your mind. There's so much stuff, like especially when it comes to the logistical aspects, like the way that everything links together, and you have like a PWA and you need to like deep link into your native app. It's like there's so much junk to kind of keep around in our head. And like the term full stack developer even is like web developers are full stack developers. So like what's the word that we use for React Native developers? I've wondered this a lot. Like, am I a whole stack? That's my new best guess. I'm a whole stack, full stack. But it's a painful because like I spent months working on my mobile app, and then I'm like, wait a second, everyone wants to use this probably from the web. Like, like yeah, I need to have a little adapter so that people can install it into their mobile app so their apps can load data from the CMS. But like the main interface that my customers will be using to reconfigure their apps is through the web app. So like I had neglected the web side of things to a crazy degree, and it's such a pain to try to share logic and functionality across mobile and web. But I did make some progress on that. I've integrated Solido into the monorepo, and Solido is the system from Fernando Rojo that basically ties together Expo and Next. And it's pretty simple. In fact, it could potentially be taken even to the next level to build something that's like, if you want to add a new screen to your application in only one place, like that can be done on top of the Solido architecture, it looks like. So you just have like one JS file with all of your common screens that work on web and native, and that also defines the path. So it's doable. Yeah, I know, like doing web first is just so practical. It does make a lot of sense. And I'm just living in dreamland over here where I'd really like to be able to build on the like web and mobile like equally at the same time, like as if that's feasible, but I'm still like believing that that can be done. And it's crazy. I mean, I thought there would be other ecosystems that are like basically able to do what React Native does, where you kind of have shared code, almost as much shared code as you want to across web and mobile. Like at a certain point, it starts, you don't want to share code because there's concerns that are specific to each platform. Like all the navigation UI on React Native and on Next, like you've got server rendering and all sorts of different trade-offs that you would have compared to a native app. Okay, so here's where we're storing the session in the wrong place. So users files, user ID. It's under the user ID, it's called sessions. Okay, maybe we fixed everything. Oh, now we got a session. Hey, I like the look of that. And look, there's a session file that's shown up. So now the session has the session token. Okay, but here it's still specifying authenticator ID. I don't think authenticator's ID is something that we want exposed to the client at all. So here, let's just send back user ID instead. Okay, so here, this is kind of on the front end. This is, yeah, and we don't want it to be authenticator ID. We're gonna like break what's going on in the React Native app too. Just for fun, like I can show you the app a little bit. It's not, most of the stuff is turned off right now, but we are gonna wanna make sure that after this change is done, we can still log in on the mobile app. I'm gonna press R here. Oh, it's not connected to the phone. I'm gonna press R on the phone. And it looks like it's having a little whoopsies. Reload. Oh, okay, if I go physically press the reload button, it works. So here's auth, and you're wondering like why auth is here. It's because this is, okay, well this part is actually hard-coded on the client. This was a cheat. And I faked it in the auth demo, where the strategies are hard-coded here. Like this shouldn't, like these strategies are not actually available right now on the server. But here's the auth module, right? And this is actually defined server side. So just as a reminder, like that's what this auth refers to. So like you can have auth 1 and auth 2. If you wanted to have two different auth systems for some reason on your server, like this is the sort of stuff that you can do in the Z system. That's why all of this stuff is composable. Come back, refresh. Now there's two different auths that can potentially be logged into independently. But that's useless. I mean, that's just like more realistically, like whatever it is that you put inside of the Z container shows up here inside of this because this is what the test server is. We're connected to our local server, and it just exposes all the stuff that's inside of it. And I have some content on YouTube if that's something that you're interested in here. I'll paste my YouTube channel just in case some of you want to check it out. It's kind of a mess as far as the content all over the place, but you know what? I'm still figuring it out. And yeah, a bunch of the videos on the YouTube channel are just me kind of showing off like what I've built so far and like little demos and whatnot. And some of them are showing off how you can change the API code and all of a sudden the user interface will sort of dramatically change to reflect that. Okay, so there's the test auth strategy. Oh, right, we don't have a way of testing the test auth strategy from the front end. We just have this. But so like I need to come in and basically, I'm not logged in, am I? Server connections, tap on the test server. Okay, well, I don't think I'm logged in. All of these references to authenticator ID, we're just going to change to user ID. And this is the logout functionality. Oh no, I'm just going to change things too aggressively right now. You can kind of tell when it's about to happen. So here's the front end at the time when we're logging in. Okay, because now this is the session that we're getting back. It's going to have user ID. Yeah, blah, 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 something on saved session. So I need to find wherever the saved session. Yeah, user ID. Okay, and then here, this is when we're actually like we're making a request to the server, and this is inside of that. And we're constructing the header, the authentication header. And we use the user ID. Okay, cool. So now here on our little cheat sheet, yeah, user ID is this. This is all starting to actually make sense a little bit more than it was before. Oh, I don't know where to save these little note files, so I just kind of leave them open. That's pretty sad. I should have a more organized place for the documentation. But the priority is usually to build the thing first and then document it. Okay, so now let's make sure that when we create our session, oh, it's because we went and renamed auth. Let's name it back to auth from auth1. Okay, so now it comes back and gives us the user ID. And we can actually create as many sessions as we want here. They're all getting created as sessions. And this is because it's the test strategy, which is not a very good auth strategy. So maybe we can go try a real auth strategy like email. Let's make sure that works before moving on. I'm going to comment out the test, comment back in these two auth strategies. Oh, and here it's saying, like, look, you're not using a very good auth strategy. So I'll do login with email, Eric@Zerve app, invalid auth attempt. Yep. Even though this is a 500 error, like the status code is not right. Like this is correct. This is saying that the user is not supposed to send a token right now. And if you send null, that basically means, oh, please email me. Please email eric@zerve.app with the secret code. Bling. Yoink the secret code and plop it in here. Now, let's see if we can perform the logout, because we had just changed some stuff. Specifically, we had made it so that when you log out, you provide the user ID instead of this authenticator ID. Okay, so let's change that. This is a user ID now. Logout all is a little bit weird. And I think what it needs actually is it needs the user ID and the session ID, right? Because if you do logout all, what you're saying is that I want all of my sessions to be destroyed. So you need to be logged in order to do that, but it's actually not available. It's actually available outside of the people who are logged in. Here it says anybody can call this action. It's not protected, so we have to check for the session that's passed through using getValidatedSession. Okay, so getValidatedSession takes in the authenticator ID, but it really needs the user ID. Because look, it's going to attempt. So yeah, we're in a bad state. Like just because we're able to log in correctly does not mean we're able to use our logged in session. So we need to change some stuff. Files, okay, users, user ID, sessions. So this is just one really fast lookup to look at the user's session. So that's actually why all this stuff is necessary, to have the session ID and the user ID. And what does it mean by auth password? Oh, sorry, auth password actually has both things wrapped up in it, split by a dot. So session ID and session token. Great. And then user ID is passed in. Oh, here, look, I've got this note that says session should be stored under the user. Well, today's the day for you to get addressed. Okay, so user ID and auth password. And yeah, the password contains this ensure no path escape is a little bit weird here, but it's important for the user because we don't want to let the, anyways. Sometimes I ramble and get distracted. Well, 4 viewers, thank you for being here. All 4 of you. If you can give me a holler in the chat, would love to hear from you. Otherwise, thanks for watching me code, and hopefully this lo-fi is tickling your brain. Hopefully you're not trying to listen to other music, because that'll mess that up. So we're changing what it means to be a session from an authenticator ID plus a session ID and session token to a user ID plus session ID and session token. So let's see who's calling getValidatedSession and make sure that all of you are doing it right. Here, you're called authenticator ID, but you probably shouldn't be. Oh, and here we are in logout_all. Okay, let's go ahead and fix logout_all. It's time. It's time. Logout_all payload schema. So it doesn't have an authenticator ID. It has a user ID. And it also has the session ID. I'm not sure how this even worked before, but I'm not going to question it. I'm just going to fix it and move on. But when you log out, actually, you just need the user ID and the session ID. You don't need the session token because you want the client to delete the token ASAP on the client side. So that way, the client side, if it falls into the wrong hands, it won't, bad things won't happen. Okay, so logout_all, the schema has now changed. So now, I'll bet you, it should be able to infer the different things that are coming in here. Session token, but also user ID. Okay, TypeScript is just so dysfunctional on this project. Okay, so getValidatedSession. It requires all 3 arguments, right? It used to require 2 arguments, but now it's 3? Oh. No, remember the second argument is the password, which has a dot in it. It's ugly that we're having to stringify this here. Anyways, you know what they say about software is make it work, make it right, make it fast. So I'm still on make it work. It doesn't have to be right. It just has to be better than what was here before. Okay, so now we should be validating the session. So let's see, we have a bunch of sessions actually, right? On our user. So this is the email user, I bet. Yeah, because there's only one session. But on this one, there's a bunch of different sessions. So we should be able to call logout_all on it. So logout_all. Oh boy. Pretend you didn't see that. That was some ugly code that I had to hide from you right quick. Okay, so it's auth/logout_all. And then here we're going to specify all the things. User ID, session ID, and session token. But, it's been another hour. I'm going to take another quick bio break. But enjoy the lo-fi, and I'm just going to leave a big note that says, "Be right back." And I'm back. Anyone in chat? Anyone want to pull up? Say hi. Check in. Say what's up. It says I have 2 viewers. That's more than expected. Do either of you want to say hello? Well, you're in the right place anyways. It does not matter if you're interacting or not. Oh, Terraform. Yeah. Terraform's fun to play with. I haven't done anything but play with it, but it's a really powerful tool. And what I love about it is that there's like this community of there's like so many different modules that you can use if you want to switch to a different provider. Like they've already built it. You know, if you're switching from DigitalOcean to Linode or whatever else it is. I'd love to kind of build upon some of their infrastructure so that I could have some of that portability for my system. But right now, like the way this application is deployed is like I manually like go into a server and set all of it up. It's like the self-hosting guide is literally the only way that I deploy it right now. And that's due to my own hubris, as per usual, where like I want to use Zerve as part of its own deployment process. And it can be done. So why should I go invest in some other like proprietary continuous integration system when I can just do it by hand for a little while, and then hopefully before long this should be able to deploy itself, right? I've got a bunch of code written that's like Z modules for SSH for running arbitrary commands on a server. So the idea is once you get a Z server, you basically like have root access to that server from like a GUI, from either from the web front end or from the mobile app. And you can kind of, if it's configured to give you root access, then go for it and manage your server through a nice low code little interface. But that's just that's the dream. Okay, we were testing our auth system by going through the logout all workflow, which is a very rare, weird workflow. But because we're here and the code exists, we've got to fix it, make sure it works. Oh, you're looking at my face and not the main event. The code is the real show here, obviously. So log message when we're logging out all, we'll show the session. We actually don't use the session. We just need to call get validated session to make sure that we can get the validated session. So that's why it's not being used. Okay, log out all. Now it's giving me all sorts of validation errors. It says we need a session ID. And we probably also need other things like a user ID and a session token. Okay. This is kind of strange. Invalid. Should be an object. The schema path is the type. Oh, here, let me just query, do a get request for the dot type of logout all to see what type it thinks it should have. It should have, well, this looks exactly what I expected. It's an object, user ID, session ID, and session token. All of them are strings. Okay, maybe actually it's a different error and I'm just confusing myself. So we post to log out all, and we're getting a validation. So this validation error might be something that's trying to be read and is not being properly read, like inside of get validated session. Hey, I've got a question. What data format is it really? Like if we look at one of these sessions, does it have everything it needs on it? Well, hang on. So inside of get validated session, we're probably doing some validation, right? Yeah, so there's this validate with schema. My guess is that this is the exact place where the error is happening. So we're not able to retrieve the session properly. Okay, so you know what we do? We do a console.log. Console.log saying should have a session here. Should have a session data. So the next argument is session data. And the next argument is the, well, user ID auth password. Or user ID, session ID. We're going to see what values we have. Okay, so we're getting the same error. And what does our server say? Should have a session data. Okay, we do have a session data. Oh wait, no. The session data itself is an empty thing. It would be between these two. Uh-oh. Okay, so files/users/user ID. Oh, well, it's of course, like I knew we would have some weird error due to the empty strings. I just wasn't expecting that this is how it would manifest. Oh, so confusing. Here, I'll tell you what. New error. If there's no session data, throw new error. In fact, what do we call it? Throw new unauthorized error. Just copy this. Provide a whatever. It doesn't really matter if the error matches. It's probably better if the error does match, so that way the user is not sure of which way it fails. Okay, provide a session. Oh, okay. We'll just say provide a valid session. So we give you no information about what's going wrong, which is usually good on an authentication system. You don't want to reveal anything that people could use in bad ways. Okay, so yeah, now that's the thing, is we need to come and find a valid session, and we're going to ask that we delete all of the sessions, because any one of these sessions is like allowed to come and delete all the other sessions from a security perspective. So here's the token. I'm going to copy this into session token. And then there's authenticator ID, and then there's session ID, which is excuse me. So copy in the session ID. And I'll grab the user ID from the file name here. So now we have all of our values. We should be able to, okay, we got a new error here. Authenticator ID is not defined. And also let's go see if our sessions are gone. They are here. So clearly we had an issue before the sessions managed to get deleted. And let's see if we get past the should have a session data. Should have a session data. Yes, this is the session data, and then this is also the stuff that we used to get to the session data. And here we have logit out, logit all. That makes it seem like we are actually logging out all. So it's doing a read dir in order to get all of the sessions, and then it's basically like looking at the file names of these sessions to determine that they're sessions and not some other sort of JSON. Like, this is pretty junky. And in the case of logout all, we could delete the whole folder of sessions, but let's enumerate them using read dir, but now they're in their own folder. So I think that might have been where our issue was coming, because we were trying to read dir from a place that didn't exist. So files join users, user ID, sessions. And we don't need to do any filtering, except because it's a read dir call, we actually will get like potentially like a .ds store, because I'm on a Mac, and that's just how it is. So I will keep this filter in here to basically make sure that we're only going to be deleting the actual files corresponding to the sessions. And now I need to go ahead and make sure that this matches here. Did log out all. Okay, cool. And there's also probably a log statement we can clean up. Instead of get validated session, I think. Yeah, we can clean this. Okay, so now maybe we can log out all. Okay, it says that we succeeded. Now, are all the sessions gone? Yes. Wait, maybe? Wait, yeah, this is where the sessions were. Okay, so log out all is functional. Thank you. Now we need to log back in. Well, actually, we just had logged out from this other user with this test. The test authentication mechanism that's not even there anymore. I've turned that off by now. So we can delete that. And now our session file itself. Let's make sure that we can actually use this session elsewhere, because it did give us all three. It gave us the session ID and the session token. So let's go ahead and use this auth. So we can, it's known as the getting the auth user. Basically, if you provide the correct headers in here, in the basic auth, you should be all set. So the username is the actual user ID. So I'm going to jump back and forth here. Auth with email. So grab the user ID, which starts with 28. And then in the password field, it's the session ID dot the session token. So here's the session ID. And it's got a dot. Well, this does not feel like a native application, does it? Well, that's funny. So there's the session ID dot the session token. I'm really struggling with this like input field in Insomnia. Okay, there we go. So this probably won't work. What? Oh, because we had fixed get validated session. It does work. So good. It's now we basically just need to figure out, make sure that logout works, because this is now basically verifying that we're able to use this new session, even though the username is now kind of the ID part of that session, rather than the authenticator ID. Okay, so to log out, you need the user ID and the session ID. And it's inside of files/users/user ID. And we do want to make sure that they're not doing path escape with user ID, because we're deleting here. Like we want to make sure that you're only deleting like something inside of your user directory here. So inside of the user ID, we also have /sessions/session ID, and this is how the session ID gets created. And it looks like the way that I have logout set up is that if you pass the full-on session password, which is the session ID dot the session token, in here as the session ID, it'll still work because it has like, it splits out just the first part of it, which is like a little silly that it works this way. Kind of embarrassing, but you know. Okay, so here we're currently logged in, but we want to log out of this session that we're in. And so the first thing we would do is we'd basically come in here into our session password and delete everything that's after the dot, because that's the token. But I'm just going to copy the session ID because we want to make sure that this actually works server side. So log out. And this is not the right logout API. It now is here. And there's no auth. And we're posting JSON. Pay no mind to that. So when we're posting to logout, we have user ID and session ID. Oh, and I have the session ID in my clipboard. Auth user. And this is the user ID, this is our actual username. Like, it's not a very good username. It's kind of a long username that we give them by default. Not gonna lie. Okay, so when we log out of this one session, we should see, we should see this file disappear, basically. So I hit go. Oh, and the file's gone. Now, because the session is gone, at least from the file system, here where we're actually using the session, and we still have the correct token and everything, but we try to go and access the user, we access the protected resource, and it says no more. Okay, wow. I've like spent 2 hours and 40 minutes just getting it back to like the place where it was working before. And we're still not even, I'm not even sure it works all the way because the mobile app still needs to, we need to check it out. So I'll refresh here on the mobile app. Tap into auth, and we'll try to log in on email address. Okay, I'm having it send an email to me. Send me a code. Gosh, this user interface is really ugly right now, because my priority has been to try to start moving it towards web before I invest in making it look good, because that way we can make it look good and look consistent across everywhere. Okay, here's the login code. Okay, wow, I'm logged in. Whoa. Yes, and we can access this protected resource. And I know no one's probably looking on the screen right now, but like this is like the UI that you're able to kind of log into, and you're able to access all of this data and create new files or whatever. Foo file. And now you can do this stuff, and only the logged in users are allowed to do it. Okay, and look, there's even a set username action. Oh, wow, if only this would work, right? Like I should be able to change my name to Eric and hit submit. And, okay, well, I guess there was no error that happened. But the reason there was no error is because if we look at the implementation of set username, it's pretty empty. Yeah, trying to change username. And it also logs out the session, like the stored session. Interesting. So trying to change username. It includes the session. Oh, that's not good. Why does the session still have authenticator ID? Doesn't the session need to have user ID? Okay, yeah, look, the stored session schema. I don't mind if it has authenticator ID, but it needs user ID so bad. Okay, who's using the stored session type? This is what I need to understand. So get validated session is responsible for returning a stored session. But, oh, okay, it's when we're writing the stored session. Oh, right, because here we have user ID, right? Oh, wait a second. The user ID should not be in the stored session. What? Because if we change the user ID, we don't want to have to change every file in that folder. Whoopsies. Okay. So the stored session itself will not have that. Okay. Okay, so get Z logged in users only use this one place, right? Yeah. I'm not so sure about this one. Okay. Make sure it has the user ID as the first argument. Because we should have the user ID here, otherwise what's going on? Right. Here this is called authenticator ID, but it's really the user ID, I think. Right? Right? Surely. Okay, I'm going to go look at the type for create Z auth container, which is a special type of Z. Okay, TypeScript is like trying to show me this thing and it's taking forever, so I'll just open the file up myself. So there's auth ID and auth key, so it doesn't care about what it considers it. For us, the auth ID is the user ID, and the auth key is the session ID and the session token concatenated. But who cares? I'm also confusing myself because I don't know what the difference is between get Z logged in user and create user Zs. Oh, create user Zs is the one that the app developer is going to define. Okay. Okay, so is there no error anymore? Get Z logged in user. It has its own username. So okay, so trying to change username, we know it's like the previous username is the user ID. So like we'll say if username is equal to the user ID, return true or null. It's like, hey, that you were successful at changing a username if you're trying to change it to your existing username. Not implemented. Otherwise, we throw an error saying that we haven't written the code yet. So let's see if we can get our username here. This is our username, long string. If we set our username to something else, it fails. Okay, that's a funny looking error, but no problem. Paste. Oh, so it succeeds. We can successfully change our username as long as you don't actually change it. Good. So to change the username, we need to change the authenticators who point to the username, and we need to change the username itself. Changing the username itself is really easy, but the authenticators are harder. So I think because we want to make sure that this thing can fail at any time without leaving us in a terribly broken state, I think we first want to remove the usernames or remove the authenticators from the existing user by saving all of them, and then do the move, and then only then add all the authenticators back. So it's not ideal. This is exactly why you wouldn't want to use a file system for an auth thing. But this is the edge case that is that like this is painful in. Most of the time, it's going to be pretty easy. The first step is to look at all the authenticators on the user. So we're first going to query for the user's file. So the user data is users or user files. Read file, read JSON actually. And the path is when you join the username, no, the user ID, their existing username, not their new username. I'll change this to new user ID. For the sake of clarity, and user.json. So we expect to get to here. We're trying to change our name to Eric. Okay. Read JSON is not a function. Well, it's probably my own fault. Yeah, it's because it's .call. TypeScript was telling me about it, but when TypeScript is too slow, it's really not my fault. User data is a promise. That's fine, because we forgot to await. Now the user data is successfully loaded. It has the authenticator IDs. And we'll say that for now, that we just know that you're going to be the right thing. So we'll yoink the authenticator IDs off of the user data. Why not do registration and not allow username change? That's an interesting question. I think username changing is pretty important for an account where you have like a public profile, and this is technically one of those apps because you can like query for the user like zerve.app/username, and people need to be able to change their usernames. But it's an interesting question. It's mostly because I want to have my own internal user IDs, so that way like everyone can have their own namespace on my website. But I've certainly considered other other like things where you you can only attach to your email, and you can maybe delete your account, but you can't reassociate your account to a different email. But in that case, then you need to sort of have the ability to move resources from one account to another, which it's all about the trade-offs. It's tough to know, but for my app, I think it makes sense because I want people to, like, even if they don't provide a username, or if they don't want to provide a username, they will still have like a unique but very hard to guess URL. And then if they want to sort of re-identify themselves, that should be doable. But if anyone has content, or if Creekburn, if you have content on like sort of the thought process that goes into auth systems, I'd love to know more, because yeah, there's just not much content on the sort of design philosophies behind it. And people have super strong opinions. Like, I was tweeting a few weeks ago about, like, would people prefer sign-in links or passwords? And basically there's just like total divergence. Some people would really prefer passwords, and some people would really prefer one-click magic links. So, yeah, I know my auth system is a little bit weird because there's not so much of a different step between authentication, or between sign-in and registration. It's basically like you're trying to sign in, and maybe you've signed in this way before, or maybe you haven't. But I find that that's a little bit more intuitive, or at least that's the way that OAuth kind of tends to think about it, where it's like at the end of your OAuth process, you've either succeeded and you have this identifier for them, or you haven't. But then you still need to like go and take that OAuth identity, that OAuth authenticator, as I would consider it in this parlance, and tie that to your user account, because you know, as soon as you start using OAuth, you need a way to tie that in with your email or phone-based user system. And so, yeah, it's like my design here is not like perfect by any means, but most of the complexity does feel justified here, which is a little weird because it feels like unnecessarily complex. But considering all the different ways your auth system needs to be able to sort of evolve, with people adding and removing, email addresses, and like the annoying one where you change a primary email address, it can be pretty painful. Yeah, but we're here in the middle of the username changing process, and we're going to iterate over each of the authenticator IDs with, oh wait, this is so annoying. Promise.all. So I don't think we have a way to, yeah, we just have to do them all with promises here. Oh. So for each authenticator ID, okay, so these are the authenticator IDs. And those are, oh no. I might have made things bad for myself. Because we need to go and look up this thing, but we also need to know. Yeah, wait, there's authenticator ID and there's also authorization ID. That's so confusing. Are authorizations the real name for authenticators? Oh my. So strategy authorization files. Yeah, wait, strategy authorization files is... Okay, geez, that's so confusing. I'm going to change all the language to match. Because, like, it's confusing enough as it is, but then I've got conflicting names on top of everything. Yeah, I'm with you that, yeah, like authorization versus authentication. No, that definition is helpful, but like, what do you call? So maybe I should use the word authorizer because it's not either of those things. An authorizer is like the thing that says like, oh yes, this email is now like has like logged into this account. It's the thing that sort of authorizes you. Well, it's it's the no, it's an authenticator. Yeah. So it would be okay. So yeah, now I'm thinking that instead of calling it authorizer, it would be an authenticator per your definition, because it's basically a piece that's proving who you are. But there's like several different ways of doing it. And I've never really thought of like um, authenticator being a noun. Like that's just a weird thing. But yeah, and it is definitely it's authenticating who the user is. So I'm with you. It's an authentication token. So I'll find these izers, I'll these authentic authorizers, and see if I can rename them before I get too confused. Actually, it might just be this one place. They're the authentications. So I'm going to go and delete the old file and restart the server. Do I still have a syntax error? That would be a problem. Right. Okay. How was I testing this anyways? Authenticator IDs. Hmm. Authentication file data. We're getting there. Okay, all the renaming is done there. Now I think I have to log in to get that authentication associated with my user account again. Oops. I've got my app into a bad state and I have to delete the whole server connection and add the server back. Okay, so I think the way I store the authenticator ID needs to change. Or the way I store the authenticator. Okay, so because the strategy name is included under the in the hash, we can be confident that all of the authenticator IDs are going to be unique across the whole auth. So we're not going to be using these segmented authentication strategy files anymore. Strategy authentication files. You're going to go away and be replaced with a simple one-liner. Okay, so authentications. For now, I'll just try flattening this out by hand. And then we can just log in again later to make sure that continues to work. Okay, but now we have the ability to actually access the authenticators. Now we just need to fix this not implemented error by implementing the logic that we wanted. So for every authenticator ID, now we can access the file. Authentication files dot z dot was delete file. Oh, and it's actually delete a whole folder. Wait, why am I deleting it? I don't think we need to delete it, actually. I think it's a matter of reading it and then changing it. And yeah, changing the username is going to be one of the slowest operations on the entire auth system. But that's okay. if anything's going to be slow, it should be the stuff that's super rare. So for all of the authenticator IDs for the given user, we need to go into each one of them and basically remove the associated user ID. Oh man, I've misspelled authenticator probably so many times. Why does it have so many letters? Okay, delete file.call. And it's not delete file, it's read read JSON, like the opposite of delete file. And also, I don't know why these are folders anymore. They could just be files. It's because I used to have the session in here, actually, I think is why. And fortunately not anymore. Oh, the things you come across when you're abusing a file system as a database. Who would have thought? Oh, everyone? Okay. Okay, wait, so this authenticator file, right, it refers to the user ID, right? Yes. Good, so now it's going to delete the reference to the user ID. Or what if it even sets the user ID temporarily? Oh, this is wild stuff. This is wild stuff. It'll set the user temporarily to the authenticator ID. Really, there's no rule that won't be broken here. That's kind of how it's going. This is code that anybody would be embarrassed to write. So finally, the new user ID is going to be referenced down here. New user ID. So I'm going through extra steps here because I want to be able to fail at any time and not to be in a really unsafe state where potentially somebody can like claim a new username and then somebody else can log in as them. Like if two people are after the same username and something fails during this process, I want to make sure that nobody can ever log in as another user. Obviously, that's like the worst case scenario here. Move. Okay, so I can rename just, yeah, I can have a from. Oh, it's move.call. I always screw that up. What are the arguments to .call? Source or something like that? TypeScript, catch up with me. Yeah, a lock file is another way to deal with it, but the problem is like, what does the application do if like there's like a hanging lock file? And so that's like, well, like I would use a lock file if I felt like there was absolutely no other way. But just like having to write the code of like what happens when you like are trying to, like if there's a lock file that's like dangling, then potentially a user could like be kind of screwed out of their account until someone goes into the file system and deletes that lock file. So I'm trying to make it as like robust as possible without using lock files, but yeah, I mean, if it came to that, I would hope that there would only be like one lock file necessary for like the whole system, and everything else would be managed in memory on that process. But who knows? If it gets to that, then like that would be a code smell that it would like make me a little more urgent to like have to move away. A lock file, a TTL on a lock file. That's an interesting concept. In its name or in its content. Thank you for explaining. I was about to ask like how that would be set up, or if you would just potentially look at like the last time it was touched, like on the file system write time or something. But yeah, TTL, that could also make sense. But then the problem is like I feel like I'm kind of in the same spot that I'm in right now with regard to like once you reach that TTL, it's like okay, now like that you might be in an inconsistent state because like there's a lock file that has an expired TTL. So like then we're kind of back in square one where it's like how do I like design it so that it basically never can have an inconsistent state. And that's kind of the theory, is that like there's all these different like authenticators that can allow you to log into your user ID, and you have a reference to them and they have a reference to you. And that's kind of the problem, is that like you want to make sure that there's never inconsistent references. So what I'm doing right now is I'm making it so that the first step is let's see if I can actually show you. The first step is I change all of these things, these authenticators that refer to you. They no longer refer to you, they only refer to themselves. So for a very small period of time, these authenticators basically, they like will not work for logging in as you, because we want to make sure that like at no point has your username been moved, and they're still able to log in as that other user, because if it fails, we're in a really bad state. So here in the worst case scenario, if it fails, a user will like log in with one of their email addresses that they have on the account or one of their phone numbers, and rather than logging them into their actual account, it'll log them into like a new account for that username or for that email address, which would not be good, but it's more of a recoverable situation because they probably have a different authenticator that they can use to kind of get in. Like maybe they logged in with Google or something else, or maybe they logged in with their phone number instead of their email. So I don't know. These are the sort of problems that I'm cooking up for myself by doing all of this on the file system. So go me. Oh, we're calling read JSON, but I'm trying to provide a value. So it's write JSON. Okay, and on the implementation of move, let's see if I can see. This is inside of the file system code. It's called from and to. I didn't remember what it was called. So from, so we're literally just moving from user ID to new user ID. So this is the one part of the code that makes perfect sense. And then now that we know your new user ID and we've successfully moved, Creekborn, a rename directory function. That's exactly what files.z.move means. Because like on the file system API in Node, like move directory is the same thing as move file. They just call it rename, and then in this little abstraction that I've made, it's called move. So basically, moving a file and moving a directory is the same thing, and that's what's happening. Is it's moving this user directory. So what should happen after like we do this, I should be able to go from the mobile app here where I'm setting my username like to Eric3. And here I should be able to come in and we should see this name change to Eric3. This is the literal move that's happening. And it's the folder that contains all the sessions, and it also contains the user.json, which right now the user.json literally only refers back to the authenticators that the user can log in as. And that's how we know which authenticators need to be updated. But the user.json might have additional stuff as well, like I don't know, maybe the user, like the name, the display name, but probably most importantly, the password will be in the user.json, like the hashed password and salt. God damn, it's already 10:15. Okay, well, I'm gonna have to end this stream pretty soon and like eat some stuff. But this has been fun. It's been real fun. Thanks for both of you, the spiciest dev and Creekburn, for hopping in a little bit and seeing. It looks like we actually might reach this place where we're able to get the username to change, if this code does what I hope it will do. So I'm going to stare at it for another minute or two, and then we'll get back into our testing workflow. Oh, the schema for my move Z action is super nonsense. Required properties are path, but the properties that are on here are from and to. So let's change the required properties to from and to. This is the sort of thing that happens like when there's just one person in the code base and it's like no one's like maintaining this separate. It's just like when I find issues in it, I go in and fix those issues. Okay. And here, this is another case where we need write JSON. So these TypeScript errors are actually being very helpful. Okay, and then from the client side, this is not going to be very good because as soon as we successfully change the username, like our client is not going to be able to handle it properly. So yeah, I'm thinking that like we can verify that it works by just going in onto the Insomnia, but we will use the UI here to change the username. We'll give it a shot. And yeah, I'm just going to hit save, and I guess the server's running. I'm going to hit submit. We got a failure. Code never works on the first try. Not implemented error. Oh, did I just leave that in there? Yeah, this error was still here, but maybe it did work actually. I'm going to delete the junk. Let's see on the file. Oh, it changed my username. Cool. And then what about the authenticator? Now we need to go make sure this authenticator has the new username. It does. It has the user ID of Eric3. Oh, okay. Folks, I cannot tell you how bad like my writer's block has been. Like this like code has been like in a half broken state, just like sitting in my file and like in my working directory for like a week, and like I like couldn't figure it out. It just took too much concentration, and like I couldn't summon the concentration, I guess, without going live. So that's why we are here. Oh, we even created a new test authentication strategy that might come in handy at some point in the future. Okay, so let's make sure that our client side is totally busted. We know that. Let's make sure that we're able to basically just get our new user with our username. And I'm going to be doing something hacky where I'm going to look at the session manually to to do this, but I'm still going to be testing the right thing. I'm still being very deliberate about what I'm testing. So here's the session ID. And the session ID gets put in here as the first part of the password. And then the username here is now Eric3, which was the username that wound up succeeding. And of course, the session here needs the session password. So I'm going to come in here and grab the token, or the session token. And that's there's a dot. Okay. Okay. So now, yeah, this is it. We are now like my username is now changed here, and we're able to access all of the same stuff. So our sessions are preserved through the username change. And I think this is an amazing stopping point. Like I still need to go fix the client, make sure that the client is basically updating its own username when it changes. Or when it calls the change username on the server, it needs to go and update its own session. So that way it like is continuing to access the correct username. But this has been a lot of fun. So give me a shout out if you're still here, and let me know what I can do to improve next time, or sort of what you think about this harebrained project. It's a little bit extreme. I mean, I'm also showing you some of the ugliest parts about it. I don't usually jump on the rooftops and brag about how it's a file system based authentication system. Pretty soon this is going to be pretty invisible. Well, thanks Spiciest Dev for hanging out, and Creekburn as well. This has been quite a fun return to Twitch, and I hope to do this again soon. Repeat it, and I also have a YouTube channel. I'll go ahead and plug that, and if you want to look at some wacky YouTube rants, thanks for tuning in, Creekburn, and I'll see you next time. Bye, y'all.